blackceo sent to the economy line. She cancels the entire flight with a single silent move. Excuse me, this lane is for first-class passengers only. Economy has not been called yet. You need to step back. The voice did not come through the microphone. Brenda Kowalski did not need the microphone. She had spent 22 years learning exactly how to project her voice across a terminal, loud enough to carry over the ambient roar of rolling luggage and overhead announcements, loud enough to reach the ears of every person standing in the general boarding area, loud enough to make a point without technically making a scene. She was very good at this. She had practiced it in the way people practice anything they are rewarded for repeatedly doing without consequence. Dozens of heads turned. The priority lane at Gate B24 was roped off in burgundy velvet, a narrow channel of carpet reserved for Meridian Airlines' first-class passengers and its highest-tier elite members. The lane was empty except for one person, a woman standing quietly at the front of the stanchions, a slim leather tote over one shoulder. Her phone screen lit and facing outward, displaying a digital boarding pass. Seat 1A. She had not moved when Brenda spoke. She had not flinched. Her posture was the same as it had been when she stepped into the lane 2 minutes earlier. Straight-backed, unhurried, the posture of someone who was exactly where she was supposed to be and had no interest in arguing the point. Her name was Josephine Carter. She was a black woman in her early 40s. Dark skin, flawless under the unforgiving brightness of the terminal's overhead lighting. Natural hair pulled back into a clean, elegant updo. She wore a cream cashmere sweater, the kind whose quality you could not name if you had never touched real cashmere, but which registered on something instinctive the way fine things always do. Charcoal trousers, perfectly tailored, leather loafers that had never seen a sale rack, one watch on her left wrist, slim, understated, no diamonds. Nothing about her announced what she was. That had always been intentional. She looked at Brenda. She offered a polite, measured smile. "I am in the correct lane," she said, her voice smooth and even, calibrated to the same neutral frequency she used in boardrooms when someone said something she found beneath the dignity of a real argument. "I am flying first class." Brenda let out a loud, theatrical sigh. It was the kind of sigh that contains a full sentence. Something along the lines of, "I cannot believe I have to deal with this again." And she deployed it with the ease of someone who has made it a core professional tool. She stepped out from behind the gate podium, crossing her arms over the front of her polyester uniform, and she walked toward the stanchion with the particular gait of a person who believes the ground beneath her feet belongs to her. She was a woman in her late 50s, broad-shouldered with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and an expression that had long since settled into its permanent resting state of mild contempt. 22 years behind airline gate podiums had done something to her face. Not aged it exactly, but set it the way a plaster cast sets around whatever shape it is poured into. The shape Brenda's face had been poured into over 2 decades of what she considered unrewarded service was one of quiet, practiced resentment. "We get this a lot," Brenda said loudly. She was still projecting. She was not speaking to Josephine so much as she was speaking to the general audience she had arranged around herself. The economy passengers in the holding area, the couple near the window, the family with the stroller, all of them now watching. People think they can just step into the premium lane to board early. Group 5 boards in 40 minutes. I need you to step back into the main concourse. In the economy boarding area, 3 rows back from the stanchion, a young woman named Priya Menon had already raised her phone. She was 28 years old, Indian-American, with a travel journalism blog that had built itself to 400,000 followers, largely on the strength of her instinct for exactly the kind of moment she was watching right now. She had covered gate disputes on 4 continents. She had documented everything from lost luggage disasters to full-blown airport meltdowns. She had seen gate agents be rude and passengers be ruder. She had seen the full spectrum of airport behavior at its most graceless and human. This felt different. She could not have said precisely why not yet. But something about the way the woman in the priority lane was standing, the absolute unperturbed stillness of her, made Priya's thumb move to the record button before her brain had fully made the decision. She pressed it. She kept it steady. Josephine had not moved. She held her phone out the boarding pass, still clearly visible on the screen. Seat 1. A Meridian. Airlines Flight 408 Josephine Carter. The letters were large. The seat number was not ambiguous. "If you scan my boarding pass," she said, her voice remaining at exactly the same register it had been at, "we can avoid this entirely." What happened next made Priya's hand tighten on her own phone. Brenda stepped forward, reached out, and took Josephine's phone directly from her hand. Not requested it, not gestured for it, took it, plucked it from Josephine's extended grip with a snap of her wrist that drew an audible gasp from the woman standing nearest to the stanchion. It was a violation of airline protocol so clear and so obvious that even passengers who did not know the specific policy felt it in their gut, the way any person feels it when they watch someone take something that does not belong to them. Priya zoomed in without moving her feet. Standing 3 feet behind Brenda's right shoulder, a young woman named Elena Reyes had been watching the whole exchange from her position at the secondary gate terminal. Elena was 27, Hispanic, and had been working this gate for 8 months. She was good at her job, genuinely good at it, the kind of good that came from actually caring whether passengers had what they needed. She had seen Brenda handle difficult passengers before. She had seen Brenda be sharp dismissive and occasionally cruel in the way people are cruel when they have decided a person does not merit the full version of their courtesy. But she had not seen Brenda take a phone out of someone's hand. Elena took 1 step forward. Brenda turned her head, just slightly, just enough to make eye contact over her shoulder, and the look she gave Elena was the look a supervisor gives a junior employee when they are about to say something that will embarrass them both. Elena stopped. She stood with her hands at her sides, and they curled slowly into fists, and she did not say anything. Brenda carried Josephine's phone back to her terminal. She held it at arm's length, tilted it toward her, and began tapping aggressively at her keyboard. With the other hand, her expression arranged into one of professional skepticism. "Anyone can screenshot a boarding pass," she announced loudly enough for the front rows of the economy queue to hear. "We have had a lot of fraud lately. I need to verify this in the system." Josephine stood at the stanchion. She did not fold her arms. She did not shift her weight. She watched Brenda type, and she waited, and her face held the expression of a person who is watching something happen that is exactly what they expected to happen. Not pleasantly, but without surprise. The system loaded. Brenda's fingers slowed. Her eyes moved across her monitor, and whatever was on it made her go very still for a moment, the aggressive momentum draining out of her posture, the way water drains out of a basin when the plug is pulled. Because what the system said was not complicated. What the system said was unambiguous. Josephine Carter, Seat 1A. A fully paid, confirmed, unrestricted first-class ticket. A fare of $14,000. Boarded under the Priority Elite classification. Not a screenshot. Not a scam. A seat that belonged to the woman standing at the stanchion who had told Brenda exactly that from the first word she spoke. Brenda stared at the screen. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, and then she heard the sound of wheels on tile and a booming voice. And the situation, which had been a simple one, with a simple correct answer, became something else entirely. Before we go any further, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. And if what you just saw made your blood boil the way it did for every single person standing in that terminal, hit subscribe. Because what this woman does next will leave you absolutely speechless. The voice belonged to Richard Harmon, and it entered Gate B24 the way Richard Harmon entered most spaces, loudly, physically, with an assumption of welcome that had never once been tested. He was in his mid-40s, broad-chested, with the particular build of a man who had been athletic in college and had since stopped, but whose body had retained the memory of taking up space. His tie was loosened. His suit jacket was open, the lapels flapping as he moved. A bulky garment bag was slung over one shoulder, and a rolling carry-on clattered behind him, and on his wrist a gold Rolex was sliding toward his hand, as though it had been trying to escape him all evening. He was shouting into one of his AirPods as he walked, not into a handset, just projecting his voice into the air around him, indifferent to the people stepping out of his path. "Tell the London office the signing is on. I will be there by 9. Tell them 9, not 10. And somebody order the Dom at the hotel. I am not drinking whatever they serve on the plane." He elbowed past a family with a stroller. He did not slow down. He did not look at them. He ended the call with a tap to his ear and practically jogged the last 20 feet to the gate podium, where he stopped, leaned his full weight on the counter, and flashed Brenda a smile that was large and white and contained no warmth whatsoever. "Traffic on the Van Wyck was an absolute disaster," he said, as though this explained and excused all of it. "Tell me my seat is still there, Brenda. I need my pre-flight champagne, and I need it right away." The transformation in Brenda Kowalski was instantaneous and total. The hostile border agent dissolved. The crossed arms dropped. The theatrical sigh was replaced by something that could generously be called a smile. Richard Harmon was a Meridian Global Diamond member, the airline's highest tier, the status that came with a direct line to senior customer relations, and the implicit power to end a gate agent's career with a single phone call. Brenda had been denied a supervisor promotion 3 times in 5 years. She knew, with the bone-deep knowledge of someone whose professional survival had depended on learning this lesson early, that Richard Harmon's happiness was more important to her future than almost anything else that could happen at this gate tonight. "Mr. Harmon," she said warmly, "so wonderful to see you." She typed his name into the system. Her face fell. The color left her cheeks in the particular way that color leaves a face when it is being asked to absorb information it does not want. She looked at the screen. She looked at it again. She pressed her lips together. "Mr. Harmon," she said, and her voice had shifted into the register of someone delivering news. "They wish they did not have to deliver your original connecting flight was delayed. And when you did not check in at the front desk within the window, the system automatically released your seat in first class." Richard Harmon's smile disappeared. "Excuse me," he said, each word its own sentence. "The cabin is fully sold out, sir. All 14 seats are confirmed. Do you know who I am?" His voice had gone up a register and down a degree of civility simultaneously. "Do you know how much money I spend with this garbage airline? I am closing a $500 million merger in London tomorrow morning. I am flying first class on this plane, or I promise you I will make one phone call to the VP of Customer Relations, and you will be directing traffic in the employee parking lot by Friday." Brenda's eyes were moving across her screen with the rapid, desperate energy of someone searching for a solution in a room that has no doors. The first-class cabin was sold out. 14 seats, 14 confirmed. The system was locked. There was no way to add a passenger to a full cabin. And then her eyes moved to her secondary monitor, to the name she had pulled up before Richard arrived. Carter. Josephine. Seat 1A. Brenda's gaze lifted. She looked from the screen to Richard Harmon's flushed, furious face. She looked to the priority lane where Josephine Carter still stood perfectly still, watching all of this with an expression of quiet, focused attention. The expression of someone who is watching a situation arrange itself exactly as they expected it would, and is taking careful mental note of every detail. Brenda's eyes went back to her keyboard. Her hand moved to the mouse. She highlighted Josephine Carter's reservation. She pressed the modify key. The whole thing took 11 seconds. "Don't worry, Mr. Harmon," Brenda said smoothly, and her voice had recovered all of its warmth. "There was a glitch in our system, but I have just corrected it. Seat 1A is yours." She began printing his boarding pass. "I have found you an alternate seat on the aircraft," she added, almost as an afterthought, barely glancing toward the priority lane. "There was an overbooking error on our end." Josephine stepped forward from the stanchion. "Seat 1. A is my confirmed seat," she said. Richard Harmon turned to look at her for the first time. He looked her up and down with the particular expression of a man who has decided before a person opens their mouth that whatever they are about to say does not apply to him. "Listen, lady," he said. I do not know how you scammed an upgrade, but the adults are doing business here. Back off. Brenda slid the fresh boarding pass across the counter to Richard. Mr. Harmon is a Global Diamond member, she said loudly. There was an overbooking error. He has priority. That is a lie. Josephine's voice did not rise. It did not waver. It landed in the space between them like something solid and cold. You and I both know the system did not overbook. You manually removed me from my confirmed seat to accommodate a passenger who missed his own check-in window. That is a violation of the Department of Transportation's Passenger Bill of Rights. It is also a violation of Meridian's own carriage contract, both of which I can cite chapter and verse if you would like me to. Brenda's face flushed, a complex color, embarrassment, and fury together, the particular red of a person who has been caught doing something wrong in front of witnesses and has decided that the only available response is to double down. She leaned across the counter. Listen to me very carefully, she said, and the pretense of customer service was gone entirely, now stripped away, and what was underneath was just a woman who had decided she had the power to do this and was going to do it. You were bumped due to an equipment change and weight distribution protocols. That is the official airline position. I have generously found you a seat on this aircraft instead of rolling you over to tomorrow's flight. She slid a paper boarding pass across the counter. You are in seat 38E. That is a middle seat in the last row of economy. You can take it, or I can call airport security and the TSA and have you removed from this terminal for being disruptive and threatening an airline employee. The silence at gate B24 was complete. 300 people had gone quiet. Not because anything loud had happened, because something very quiet had happened, the kind of quiet that falls when everyone in a room understands simultaneously that they have just witnessed something that should not have been allowed to happen. Richard picked up his boarding pass and his garment bag. He laughed a short, hard sound. Enjoy the peanuts in the back, sweetheart. He gave her one last look, loaded with a contempt so casual it was almost cheerful. Then he walked down the jet bridge and disappeared. Josephine looked at the paper boarding pass on the counter. Seat 38E, boarding group 5. Row 38, wedged between the rear galleys and the lavatories at the absolute back of a Boeing 777. The worst seat on the plane. She looked up at Brenda. Brenda had her hand resting on the telephone, ready, almost hoping for a reason to pick it up. Josephine picked up her phone and the paper boarding pass, and she looked at Brenda Kowalski with an expression that was not anger and was not defeat and was not anything Brenda had been hoping for. It was the expression of a chess player who has just watched her opponent of their own free will walk directly into the position she needed them to occupy. Are you absolutely certain? Josephine said, her voice barely above a conversational register. This is the path you want to take. Take your ticket and step aside, Brenda said, or you will not be flying at all. Understood, Josephine said. She turned. She walked toward the economy boarding queue. She did not look back. She did not need to. Elena Reyes, standing behind the podium, watched her go. Then she reached slowly into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out her own phone. Rewind 45 minutes. The Meridian Airlines first-class lounge at Terminal 4 was the kind of room that justified itself through its view. Floor-to-ceiling glass ran the length of the north wall, and through it the tarmac of John F. Kennedy International Airport spread in all directions under a sky that had been raining since 4 in the afternoon. The Boeing 777 that would become Flight 408 sat beneath the amber wash of the floodlights, enormous, and still being loaded with cargo and catering by crews in yellow rain gear who moved around it with the practiced indifference of people who work near very large things and have long since stopped being impressed by them. Josephine Carter stood at the window. She had a glass of sparkling water in one hand, untouched for the last several minutes. She was watching the plane. She was thinking, from behind, from the perspective of any of the lounge's other inhabitants, the business travelers in their suits, the couple sharing a cheese board near the bar, the young man asleep across 3 chairs with his mouth open. She looked like a woman who was simply waiting for a flight. Composed, unhurried, dressed in a cream cashmere sweater and charcoal trousers and loafers that had never seen a clearance rack. A single leather tote on the chair beside her, slim and unbranded. One watch on her left wrist, a thin gold disc face on a leather strap, the kind of watch that costs more than most people's monthly rent and is designed specifically to look like it does not. She did not look like what she was. She had spent the better part of 42 years ensuring that she never did. Josephine Carter was the founder and CEO of Carter Vanguard Capital, a private equity firm she had built from a two-person operation in a rented Brooklyn office 17 years ago into one of the most formidable financial institutions on the planet, managing over $400 billion in assets across 6 continents. She had been on the covers of 4 business magazines in the last 3 years. She had testified before a Senate subcommittee on financial regulation. She had been described variously as the most powerful woman in American finance, the most disciplined deal-maker of her generation, and by one notable hedge fund manager who had been on the losing end of a negotiation against her as the kind of quiet that you only recognize as a storm after it has already passed over you. 36 hours ago, Carter Vanguard had executed the hostile takeover of Apollo Aviation Group, the parent company of Meridian Airlines. The deal was months in the making, aggressive in its structure and ruthlessly precise in its execution. The regulatory filings were complete. The board resolutions were signed. The ink was technically dry, though the announcement was under a strict non-disclosure embargo until the Wall Street opening bell tomorrow morning, when the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal would run simultaneous pieces, and the market would do what markets do when a surprise of this magnitude lands before anyone has had their second cup of coffee. She was flying to London tonight to meet with the British Civil Aviation Authority. Meridian's European routes required separate licensing under UK aviation law, and the transfer of those licenses to the new ownership structure needed her physical presence and signature before the London Stock Exchange opened in the morning. It was the last piece. She had every private jet at her disposal. She had taken commercial. This was not carelessness. Josephine Carter was not a careless woman. She had chosen commercial for the same reason she had built every major decision of the last 2 decades around the same foundational principle that you cannot lead what you have not seen and you cannot fix what you have refused to look at directly. In the 8 months since Carter Vanguard had begun the quiet process of acquiring Apollo Aviation, her research team had surfaced something that the airline's own internal reporting had consistently buried. 47 formal complaints filed against Meridian's JFK ground staff. Complaints from passengers of color, from passengers with foreign accents, from passengers who did not fit the unwritten but apparently well-understood profile of who belonged in the premium cabin and who did not. 47 complaints, all closed without investigation, all marked resolved, which was the airline's internal shorthand for, "We have decided this did not happen." She had read them all. Tonight, she was not a CEO reviewing her new acquisition. She was a black woman traveling alone, boarding a commercial flight dressed in clothes that told no one what she was worth. She wanted to see what that experience looked like from the inside. She had a theory. She had hoped she was wrong. She glanced at her watch. Boarding for Flight 408 was scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. She set down her sparkling water, still untouched, picked up her tote and walked out of the lounge. The terminal was a river of people. 3,000 travelers moving in every direction at once, pulling rolling bags and carrying sleeping children and staring at departure boards and eating food from paper containers while walking. Nobody looked at her. Nobody saw anything in particular. She was a woman in a cream sweater walking through an airport. She found gate B24 and she found the priority lane roped off in burgundy velvet. And she stepped into it and stood at the front of the stanchions and turned her phone screen outward and waited. She had not been waiting long when a voice cut across the ambient noise of the terminal and said loudly enough for the entire waiting area to hear that she was in the wrong place and needed to step back. Josephine had expected something like this. She had not expected it to happen in the first 90 seconds. She looked at the gate agent. Heavy-set late 50s reading glasses on her forehead arms crossed the posture of someone who has decided something before the conversation started. She looked at the economy queue behind the stanchion at the faces turning toward her. She looked at the young woman behind the secondary terminal who was watching with an expression that was tight and unhappy and said clearly that she had seen something like this before. And Josephine Carter did what she always did when a situation arranged itself into exactly the shape she had anticipated. She noted it. She filed it. She kept her face neutral and her voice level, and she waited for the other people in the room to make their choices. People always made their choices in the end. You just had to give them enough time and enough rope. She had plenty of both. Brenda Kowalski had started at Meridian Airlines at 34 years old, a lateral move from a job at a hotel check-in desk that had itself been a step down from something else in the long, uneven staircase of a career that had never quite arrived at the floor she believed she deserved. She had come to the airline with energy, with the specific hunger of someone who has been circling a destination for years without landing. And in those early years she had been good at the work. She was efficient. She was organized. She had a memory for passenger names that her supervisors noted in her first 3 performance reviews as an asset. The promotions she expected to follow those reviews did not come. A supervisor position opened in her second year. A man with 18 months of seniority and no particular distinction was given it. She filed a grievance through her union. The grievance went nowhere. In her 4th year, another supervisor position. A woman this time younger than Brenda, who had been flagged for customer service scores. Brenda's scores were higher. She did not get the position. The official reason delivered by a manager who would not meet her eyes was that the other candidate had demonstrated stronger leadership qualities. Brenda spent 3 weeks trying to identify what those qualities were and how they differed from her own. She never found a satisfying answer. She found a different one. Over time, without any single moment, she could point to as the turning point. Brenda had developed a theory about why she had not advanced. The airline did not reward people who enforced standards. It rewarded people who were liked. And being liked in Brenda's understanding of the word meant being accommodating in ways that she believed compromised the integrity of the operation. She had watched colleagues bend rules for passengers who were charming. She had watched supervisors look the other way when a Global Diamond member demanded something outside of policy. She had built her professional identity around the idea that she at least held the line. What she had not examined, what she had never once in 22 years turned the lens of her considerable grievance back toward, was the question of how she decided where the line was, and for whom. The calculus had developed slowly, in the way that all deep biases develop not in a single lesson, but through the accumulated weight of 1,000 small reinforcements. Brenda had learned in the way that people learn things that no one says out loud, but everyone understands that certain passengers required more scrutiny than others. She had learned this from the culture of the operation, from the shared language of knowing looks between veteran staff, from the specific texture of which complaints got taken seriously by supervisors, and which were quietly encouraged to go away. She had learned it so thoroughly that it no longer felt like a decision. It felt like perception. It felt like seeing clearly. When a Global Diamond member arrived at her gate, she could identify them on sight, the quality of their luggage, the specific weight of their walk, the way they occupied space. She felt something close to relief. This was the work making sense. This was the hierarchy operating correctly. She knew how to make these passengers happy. She had built her best chance at the supervisor promotion she still wanted at 57 years old on the accumulated goodwill of Global Diamond members who left positive reviews and occasionally sent emails to her supervisors commending her service. Elena Reyes had been assigned to Gate B24 8 months ago, and in those 8 months, Brenda had arrived at a complicated, largely unexamined feeling toward her junior colleague. Elena was good with passengers in a way that made Brenda vaguely uncomfortable. Not the practiced transactional good that Brenda had developed over 2 decades, but something more instinctive, something that did not seem to require the calculation. Passengers relaxed when Elena spoke to them. Difficult situations de-escalated. Brenda had caught herself more than once watching this happen and feeling something she identified as professional skepticism, but which, if pressed, she might have had to admit was closer to envy. She treated Elena with distant professionalism. She did not include her in the informal conversations she had with longer-serving staff. She did not explain her decisions. Elena was junior. Elena would learn eventually how things actually worked. When Josephine Carter stepped into the priority lane that Tuesday evening, Brenda ran her calculus in under 3 seconds. She took in the cream sweater, no logo which read to her as suspect rather than restrained. She took in the single tote, the absence of a roller bag or a branded carry-on. She took in the face, dark skin, natural hair, calm eyes, and she ran it through everything she had been taught in the way she had been taught it without ever being formally taught it at all. The result came back the same way it always did, as a feeling rather than a thought. This person does not belong here. Not in this lane, not in this cabin. She did not question the feeling. She had not questioned it in 22 years. She stepped out from behind her podium and projected her voice across the terminal, and the 47 buried complaints might as well have been 47 pieces of evidence she had never been shown in a case she had never known was being built. The moment Brenda's hand closed around Josephine's phone and lifted it away, something shifted in the terminal. It was not a loud shift. There was no single gasp that unified the crowd, no movie moment silence that descended over gate B24. It was subtler than that and, in some ways, more powerful. The specific quality of attention that gathers when a group of strangers witnesses something that crosses a line they all recognize without having discussed where the line was. The conversations nearest to the priority lane fell off. People who had been staring at their own phones looked up. A woman in the economy queue put her hand on her husband's arm. Priya Menon did not move from her position 3 rows back. She kept her phone steady and level, and she watched through the small rectangle of her screen as Brenda walked back to the gate terminal with Josephine's phone, and she thought, I have been in this job for 6 years, and I have never once seen a gate agent take a passenger's phone. Not grab it, not take it, just reach out and remove it from someone's hand. She thought whatever happens next, the record starts here. Elena Reyes stood behind the secondary terminal, with her hands at her sides and her fists slowly tightening. She had taken the half-step forward when Brenda took the phone, and she had stopped when Brenda's glance hit her like a closed door. She knew what that glance meant. She had been on the receiving end of it 8 months now. It meant you are 27 years old, and you have been here 8 months, and I have been here 22 years, and if you think you know better than me, then go ahead and find out what that costs you. Elena stood still. The fists stayed tight. Josephine watched Brenda type at the terminal and waited. Her expression had not changed. Her posture had not changed. If you had photographed her at the moment, Brenda took her phone and photographed her again, now standing at the stanchion while Brenda aggressively keyed through her system, the images would have been essentially identical. Same posture. Same expression. The same quality of attention, focused level without heat, that a surgeon brings to a complicated procedure. Not because the surgeon does not understand the stakes, but because the surgeon understands them completely. Brenda's typing slowed. Her eyes moved across the monitor. 4 seconds of stillness, the specific stillness of someone processing information that contradicts what they expected to find. Then her eyes moved to the priority lane, to Josephine, then to the main terminal where the economy boarding queue was beginning to shift and murmur and pay attention in the way crowds pay attention when they sense something real is happening. And then the sound of rolling wheels and a voice that entered gate B24 like someone had opened a window in a pressurized cabin. Brenda, traffic on the Van Wyck was an absolute disaster. Tell me you saved a spot for me. Richard Harmon was still on his phone when he elbowed past the family with the stroller. He did not slow down to do it. He did not look at the child in the stroller or at the parents who had to yank it sideways to avoid his rolling bag. He was talking into his AirPods about firing a logistics team and buying shares and having something ready to sign in London, and his voice filled the immediate space around him in the way that some men's voices fill space. as though the surrounding air exists primarily to carry their words and anyone unfortunate enough to be in it is simply part of the delivery system. He stopped at the gate podium. He leaned on it. He produced the large, white, warmthless smile. Brenda's transformation was so fast and so complete that it was almost physically disorienting to watch. The border agent became a concierge. The crossed arms dropped. The theatrical sigh was replaced by something that stretched the muscles of her face in an unfamiliar direction. "Mr. Harmon," she said, "so wonderful to see you." She typed his name. The warm expression held for exactly as long as it took the system to load his record, and then it did the thing it had done with Josephine's record. It showed the truth. Richard Harmon had missed his check-in window. His seat had been released automatically. The first-class cabin was sold out. All 14 seats confirmed. "There is no availability in first class," Brenda began, and Richard's smile became something else entirely. What followed was not a conversation. It was a performance, and Richard Harmon had clearly given versions of it before in the practiced way of a person who has learned that volume and threat and the invocation of status reliably produces results. He talked about his diamond membership. He talked about the money he spent with Meridian. He talked about phone calls he was prepared to make and positions he was prepared to get people transferred to. His voice went up, and his face went red, and he leaned his considerable weight on the counter as though the physical mass of him could be brought to bear on the problem. Brenda was typing as he spoke. Her eyes moved between his face and her monitor with the rapid focus of someone trying to solve an equation under pressure. She was looking for inventory that did not exist. She was looking for a way to produce a first-class seat on a sold-out aircraft. She found one. It was there on her secondary monitor the whole time. It had been there since before Richard arrived. Josephine Carter, Seat 1A. A confirmed, fully paid reservation that the system had just unambiguously verified. $14,000. Unrestricted. Real. Brenda looked at Richard Harmon's red, furious face. She looked at Josephine standing at the stanchion watching all of this with an expression of quiet, complete attention. In Brenda's mind, the choice was simple. One of these two people had the power to end her career with a phone call. One of these two people, despite what the ticket said, despite what the system confirmed, Brenda fundamentally did not believe belonged in the first-class cabin. She had built 22 years of professional life on the ability to read a situation instantly and act on what she read. She read this one. She acted. Her hand moved to the mouse. She highlighted Josephine's reservation. She hit the modify key. She reassigned Josephine to seat 38E, middle last row rear galley adjacent the single worst seat on a Boeing 777. She printed Richard's boarding pass. 11 seconds. "Don't worry, Mr. Harmon," she said. Her voice had recovered its warmth completely. There was a glitch in the system. "Seat 1A is yours." She slid the boarding pass across the counter. "I have found the other passenger an alternate seat. Overbooking error on our end." Josephine stepped forward from the stanchion. "Seat 1A is my confirmed seat," she said. Richard turned to look at her for the first time. The look he gave her was the look of someone who has decided before a word is spoken that whoever is speaking is not really part of the conversation. "Listen, lady," he said. "I do not know how you scammed an upgrade, but the adults are doing business here. Back off." "Mr. Harmon is a Global Diamond member," Brenda said, loudly. There was an overbooking error. "He has priority." Josephine did not raise her voice. She did not step back. "That is a lie," she said, and the two words landed in the air between them with a precision that made the nearest passengers go very still. "You and I both know the system did not overbook. You manually removed me from my confirmed seat to accommodate a passenger who missed his own check-in window. That is a violation of the DOT Passenger Bill of Rights and Meridian's own internal carriage contract, and I can cite both chapter and verse if you would like me to." Brenda's face went through several things in rapid succession. Embarrassment, rage, the specific calculation of someone deciding they have passed the point where backing down is possible. She leaned across the counter. The pretense of customer service was gone entirely now. Underneath it was just the raw transaction of power being misused by someone who believed in that moment that she had it. "Listen to me very carefully," she said. "You were bumped due to an equipment change and weight distribution protocols. That is the official airline position. I have generously located you a seat on this aircraft instead of rolling you to tomorrow's flight. You are in seat 38E, middle seat, last row of economy." She slid the paper boarding pass across the counter. "You can take it, or I can call airport security and the TSA and have you removed from this terminal for being disruptive and threatening an airline employee. Those are your options. Choose." The terminal had gone quiet. Not the entire terminal, 3,000 people moved through it. But the specific 40-foot radius around Gate B-24 had gone to a hush that was almost reverent. People who had been in motion had stopped. Priya's phone had been recording for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Her view counter refreshing on her second device as she uploaded the clip had reached 600 in the time it had taken for the confrontation to reach this point. Richard laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that required no translation. He picked up his boarding pass. "Enjoy the peanuts in the back, sweetheart." He gave Josephine one last look loaded with a contempt so reflexive it had clearly been used before many times in many directions. He picked up his garment bag, scanned his boarding pass, and walked down the jet bridge. Josephine looked at the paper pass on the counter. She looked at Brenda's hand resting on the telephone, almost hopeful, waiting for the scene that would justify the call. The explosion of righteous indignation that would fit a particular box. The performance of the angry black woman that would let Brenda feel retroactively that she had been right to be suspicious from the start. Josephine picked up her phone. She picked up the paper pass. She looked at Brenda Kowalski one final time, and what was in her face was not fury, and was not defeat, and was not what Brenda was hoping for. It was something Brenda would not understand the significance of until much later in a different room watching footage of herself on a titanium tablet. It was patience. "Are you absolutely certain?" Josephine said in the voice she used in boardrooms when she was giving the other side of the table. "One final opportunity to reconsider this is the path you want to take. Take your ticket and step aside," Brenda said, "or you will not be flying at all." "Understood," Josephine said. She turned. She walked toward the Group 5 boarding queue. She did not look back. Elena Reyes watched her go. Then she looked at Brenda, who had already turned back to her terminal with the satisfied expression of someone who has resolved a problem. Then Elena looked at her own phone. She opened it. She typed a quick message to a contact. Not a friend, not a colleague, but the number she had saved 6 weeks ago after looking it up during a shift when she had seen something that troubled her and had not known what to do about it. The number for Meridian's internal compliance office. She sent the message. She put her phone away. She went back to work. Richard Harmon called his assistant before he had reached the end of the jet bridge. "Tell London the signing is on," he said, not breaking stride. "I will be there by 9 a.m. Tell them 9 sharp, not 10. Have someone order the Dom Perignon at the hotel. Veuve Clicquot if they do not have it, nothing else. And make sure the car is waiting at Heathrow, not circling. Waiting." He ended the call with a tap to his ear and stepped through the aircraft door into the cool, recycled air of the first-class cabin, and some of the tension went out of his shoulders. Immediately, the way tension always left Richard Harmon when he was in a space that confirmed his understanding of his own position in the world. The first-class cabin of a Boeing 777 was one of the few places Richard felt genuinely at ease. The soft lighting, the wide leather suites, the precise temperature of a cabin configured for people whose comfort is considered a priority rather than an afterthought. All of it told him something he needed to hear in the same way a person who has spent an entire day doubting themselves needs to hear a single confirming voice to feel certain again. He was supposed to be here. The space said so. The space had always said so. He found Suite 1A, dropped his garment bag in the overhead, and settled himself into the seat with the particular expansiveness of a man who has never once worried about taking up too much room. He removed his shoes, left them on the floor beside the ottoman, and put his stocking feet up with a long exhale of satisfaction. He pressed the call button. Sophia Reyes arrived within 30 seconds. She was 34 years old, 12 years into her career as a flight attendant, and she had the specific professional composure of someone who has learned to keep her face completely neutral, regardless of what is happening in it. She was Hispanic, dark-haired, with the precise posture of someone who has spent a decade standing straight in pressurized cabins. She had a silver tray with champagne and warm mixed nuts and a warm towel folded over her arm. Richard pointed at the champagne without looking at her. "That one." He snapped his fingers twice. "And another one ready before we push back. The real stuff, not the rose." Sophia set the glass beside him. She folded the warm towel and placed it near his right hand. She said, "Of course, Mr. Harmon," and her voice was perfectly calibrated to the register of professional courtesy, which is not the same thing as warmth and is not trying to be. Richard had already opened his phone and was reading through contract documents. He swiped through several pages, flagging lines, with his thumb draining half the glass of champagne without fully registering that he was doing it. He was thinking about London. He was thinking about the boardroom at Canary Wharf, the consortium of British investors who needed him physically in the room with a signed document, the deal that was supposed to have been done 6 weeks ago and had been extended 3 times, and which his managing partner had made clear in the specific language of a man who has run out of patience could not be extended again. He was not thinking about the woman at gate B24. He had already forgotten her. This was the thing about Richard Harmon's particular architecture of self. The woman at the gate had not registered as a person with a story of her own. She had registered as an obstacle briefly, and then as a problem that Brenda had solved, and then as not his concern. He did not think about what the interaction had cost her. He did not think about the flight she had paid for or what it meant to have her property taken from her hands and her seat taken from under her. He thought about London. He thought about champagne. He thought dimly, and with a satisfaction he would have been embarrassed to admit that things had worked out the way things tended to work out for people like him. He was still on his phone when the economy boarding began. The first-class cabin was sealed off from the main cabin by a heavy curtain, and the parade of economy passengers filing through the forward door and turning right was invisible to Richard from where he sat. He was aware of it only as a kind of ambient sound, the shuffle of feet, the thud of overhead bins, the occasional cry of a child. He reached for his champagne. He heard footsteps approaching from the forward galley. He looked up. The woman from the priority lane was walking past the first-class cabin, moving toward the rear of the plane. She had her leather tote over one shoulder, and she was walking at a measured pace, straight-backed, not looking left or right. She wore the same expression she had worn at the gate. Not anger, not defeat. Just that quality of attention directed forward, as if the first-class cabin and everything in it was simply a feature of the landscape she was passing through. For a moment Richard watched her walk. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his champagne glass in her direction. A mock toast. He caught her eye as she was level with his sweet, and he held her gaze and he tipped the glass toward her and he winked. It was a small gesture. It cost him nothing. It was the kind of gesture available only to people who have never once had to consider what it might feel like to be on the receiving end of it. The gesture of someone who believes with total comfort that they have won something. Josephine did not break stride. Her pace did not change. She looked at him. Really looked the way you look at something you are cataloging rather than something that affects you. And she walked past the suite and into the business class cabin and kept walking. But her jaw tightened, just once, just barely. Just enough that if you had been watching from the right angle you would have seen it. A small, precise crack in the composure sealed immediately. She filed it away with everything else, the snatched phone, the modified reservation, the paper boarding pass for 38E, and now this. The champagne glass raised in a toast by a man who believed he had won. She filed it all away. She kept walking. Sophia Reyes, standing in the forward galley, had seen the wink. She had seen it, and she had seen Josephine's face in the instant after, and she had felt something go tight in her chest that she was too professional to let surface in any visible way. She turned back to the galley cart, and she was very careful and very thorough about the arrangement of the next round of champagne glasses, and she did not look up. She had been flying for 12 years. She had seen a lot of things in 12 years. She had been better sometimes at speaking up about them than other times. Right now, she was standing in the forward galley of a plane about to push back, and she had a cabin full of passengers and pre-flight service to manage. And there was nothing she could say about a wink that could be proven documented or acted on. She picked up the champagne tray. She walked back into the first-class cabin. She kept her face perfectly neutral, which is not the same thing as being fine and is not trying to be. Richard finished his champagne. He leaned back in the suite, the leather conforming to him, the lighting exactly right, the smell of warm nuts and luxury in the recycled air. And he closed his eyes, and he thought about London, and he thought about the deal, and somewhere at the very back of a Boeing 777 in the row closest to the lavatories, Josephine Carter was sitting down in a middle seat and pulling out an encrypted phone, and he had no idea what she was about to type. She boarded with Group 5. The jet bridge was humid and close, the air in it carrying the specific warmth of a pressurized tube full of bodies moving too slowly. Josephine moved with the shuffling cue, her leather tote on her shoulder, her paper boarding pass in her hand. The boarding pass was for a seat she had not purchased. The seat she had purchased was 37 rows ahead of where she was going, and it currently had someone else's stocking feet on its ottoman. She moved through the forward door of the aircraft and turned right. The first-class cabin opened in front of her. It was everything the terminal had promised. Soft purple and gold lighting the leather suites, wide and private, each one its own small, sealed world of comfort. The temperature was perfectly controlled. Flight attendants moved through it with the particular unhurried ease of people serving in a space designed for ease, offering warm towels from silver trays, adjusting privacy screens, speaking in the lowered register, appropriate to a cabin where people expect their preferences to be anticipated. Josephine walked through it without breaking stride. She did not look at the amenities. She did not look at the other passengers who looked briefly at her in the way passengers in first class sometimes look at people walking through, noting, categorizing, moving on. She walked at the same measured pace she had walked into the terminal, the same pace she always maintained, because the pace was not about the destination. The pace was about what you refused to give the people watching you the satisfaction of seeing. She passed Suite 1A. Richard Harmon was reclined with his shoes off and a champagne glass in his hand, and his stocking feet on the ottoman of a seat that cost $14,000 and belonged to her. He saw her coming. He waited until she was level with the suite. He raised his glass. He winked. Josephine looked at him. She did not slow down. She looked at the raised glass and the wink and the satisfied ease of a man who has never once in his adult life sat in the wrong seat on a plane and understood what that costs the person who was supposed to be there. She looked at all of this the way a surgeon looks at a scan, not with emotion, but with the clean, precise attention that turns information into action. She filed it. She walked on. Business class slightly narrower, still comfortable. The seats reclined at an angle that still deserved the word comfort. People looked up from laptops and tablets as she passed. Nobody stopped her. Nobody offered her anything. She was economy, and economy was behind them, and the curtain between the cabins was as much a social border as a physical one. Premium economy, warmer, louder, the seats closer together. The smell of the cabin changed slightly. Less of the careful climate control of first class, more of the human presence of 140 bodies in closer proximity. Then the main cabin. She pushed through the curtain, and the sound hit her immediately. The specific layered noise of 300 people in the process of boarding a wide-body aircraft. Overhead bins slamming. Children crying. Arguments about bag placement conducted in 4 different languages. The ambient friction of a large number of human beings navigating a very small space. After the cathedral quiet of the first-class cabin, it was like crossing a physical border. She navigated it without expression. Past the families, past the middle-aged couple arguing about the window seat, past the teenager blocking the aisle to rearrange a backpack. Row after row, the numbers climbing as she moved toward the rear. The seats getting no smaller, but somehow feeling smaller as the context changed. The overhead bins more contested. The armrests narrower. The smell of the lavatory chemical cleaner arriving before she reached it, a faint chemical sweetness that grew stronger with each row. Row 38. She stopped. She looked at the seat. 38E middle. The bulkhead pressed against the back of the row immediately in front of it, which meant the seat in front of hers could not be reclined all the way, because the person in 37E had reclined anyway fully, and it jutted into what remained of the space. On her right, a teenager in the window seat had earbuds in his phone playing a video at a volume that suggested he owned the surrounding air. On her left, an elderly man in the aisle seat was already deeply asleep, his head tilted toward her side of the armrest, his breathing slow and loud. Neither of them had left her any of the shared armrests. The smell of the lavatories was direct and present. Josephine set her tote under the seat. She sat down. Her knees contacted the seat back in front of her immediately. Not quite crushing compression, but a firm, insistent reminder that this space was not designed for a person to sit in for 7 hours and arrive anywhere feeling like a person. She adjusted her posture as best she could. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not look around for sympathy. She did not make eye contact with the passengers nearby in the silent, universal language of economy passengers sharing a complaint. She simply sat in the middle seat of the last row and let the full physical reality of it settle around her. She had been here before. Not this seat, not this plane, but this feeling. The specific quality of a space arranged to tell you without words that your comfort was not a priority. The feeling she had cataloged at 16 in a Baltimore hotel lobby, at 26 in a midtown elevator, at 34 on a flight to Los Angeles, asked twice to verify a seat that was already verified. The feeling that had followed her intermittently across the entire geography of a life built to prove it wrong. The difference was at 26, she had arrived home and written a policy. At 34, she had landed in LA and begun the mental architecture of an acquisition strategy. And tonight, at 42, sitting in seat 38E with her knees against a reclined seat back and the smell of aviation lavatory cleaner in the recycled air, she pulled out her phone. It was a specialized device, encrypted hardwired to the secure servers of Carter Vanguard Capital Biometric locked with 3 separate authentication layers. She opened the secure messaging application. She selected the contact for Marcus Webb, her COO, who was currently in the Carter Vanguard offices in Manhattan, overseeing the integration logistics of the Apollo Aviation acquisition. She thought for a moment. Then she typed 6 words and an authorization code, Ground Flight 408, Clause 4B, Authorization J. Carter, Code Omega Black. She read it once, then she hit send. The message disappeared into the encrypted network, to Marcus's screen, to the Carter Vanguard legal team, and through the legal architecture of the Apollo Aviation acquisition agreement to the ACR's terminal in the cockpit of the Boeing 777. She was currently sitting in 280 feet forward of row 38. She locked the phone. She placed it face down in her lap. She folded her hands on top of it. She looked out the small oval window. The tarmac was still wet from the rain. The floodlights reflected in the pools of water. The same plane she had watched from the first-class lounge an hour ago now surrounding her on all sides. The same plane she owned. The faintest smile touched the corners of her mouth. Not triumph, something quieter than triumph. The satisfaction of a person who has set something in motion that cannot be stopped and who is now simply waiting for the world to catch up. The trap was set. All it needed now was time. The engines began their low, vibrating hum. The seatbelt sign illuminated. Around Josephine, passengers settled and adjusted and plugged in headphones and reached for their phones for the last time before airplane mode. The teenager to her right had fallen into the particular glassy-eyed absorption of someone 6 episodes into a show on their phone. The elderly man to her left had not woken from his sleep. The lavatories behind her clicked open and shut as the last few passengers made pre-flight use of them. Josephine closed her eyes. Not to sleep, to remember. She was 16, Baltimore, late October, cold enough for a coat. Her mother, Ruth Carter, stood in the lobby of the Hamilton House Hotel. Not a luxury hotel, a clean and decent one in the mid-range, the kind that offered a continental breakfast and a pool that the website photographed to look larger than it was. Ruth had been saving for 6 months for this one night. It was Josephine's birthday. Ruth had worked a double shift the previous Tuesday and a double shift the Saturday before that, and she had put $40 aside each time until she had enough, and she had made a reservation 3 weeks in advance, and she had worn her good coat instead of her work coat because tonight was a special night. She was still wearing her hospital scrubs underneath the good coat. She had not had time to change. They stood at the front desk. A young man in a blue blazer looked up from his computer. He looked at Ruth, the good coat, the scrubs visible at the collar, the careful dignity of a woman who had arranged herself to look like what she was, a mother, taking her daughter somewhere nice for her birthday. He said, "This area is for registered guests." Ruth said, "We have a reservation." He said, "I will need to verify that with the manager," Ruth said very calmly. "Of course." The manager took 25 minutes to arrive. Ruth stood at the front desk for those 25 minutes, her good coat buttoned, her posture unchanged. She did not raise her voice. She did not sit down, though there were chairs 3 feet away. She held the printed confirmation in her hand, and she waited, and the young man in the blue blazer avoided looking at her, and 3 other parties checked in during those 25 minutes, and none of them were asked to wait for a manager. When the manager finally arrived, he looked at the confirmation and looked at Ruth and apologized with the specific tone of a person who knows the apology is inadequate but offers it anyway because it is the tool available to end an uncomfortable situation. He gave them the room. Ruth thanked him. She took Josephine's hand and they rode the elevator up to the 4th floor, and they had the nicest room Josephine had seen in her 16 years. And Ruth ran a bath and ordered room service, and never once mentioned what had happened in the lobby. But Josephine had watched her mother's face during those 25 minutes. Not angry, not defeated, just enduring, the specific quality of a person who has learned through long practice how to hold their dignity inside them so carefully that no one watching can see the cost of maintaining it. Josephine had decided something at 16 watching her mother's face in that lobby. She had not had the words for it then. But the decision was, endurance is not the same as acceptance. Waiting for someone to acknowledge a wrong is not the same as letting the wrong happen. The difference lives in what you decide to do after you leave the room. She was 26. Manhattan spring, the particular optimism of a city where things bloom through concrete. 2 years out of Wharton, 4 months into building Carter Vanguard from a rented office in Brooklyn that smelled of old paint and ambition. She had landed a pitch meeting with a mid-size venture capital firm on the 22nd floor of a building in Midtown. A meeting she had earned through 2 months of follow-up emails and 1 cold call that had lasted 11 minutes and ended with a reluctant but real yes. She had rehearsed the pitch 40 times. She knew every number. She wore her best suit, the one she had saved for dark navy well-cut, the kind of professional armor she had learned to treat with care because replacing it was not easy. She walked through the lobby to the front desk. The receptionist looked up, looked at her, said without a pause, without uncertainty, "The service entrance is on 47th. Josephine heard it. She felt it land in the specific way those things land. Not all at once, but in stages, each stage a little colder than the last. She looked at the receptionist. She smiled. She said, "Thank you," and she walked to the elevator bank and pressed 22. She delivered the pitch. 14 minutes. She answered every question. She closed a $20 million fund by 4 p.m. On the way out, she walked back through the lobby. She passed the receptionist's desk. The woman did not recognize her. There was no lens of expectation on her. Now no arrival moment to run through a filter. She was just a woman in a navy suit leaving a building, and the receptionist glanced up and glanced away. That night, Josephine opened the document she had started 3 months ago, Carter Vanguard's founding charter. She typed in the first paragraph of the section titled Company Culture and Values, a Single Policy. No visitor to this office will be redirected on the basis of appearance. Every person who walks through the front door receives the same greeting as every other person. No exceptions, no calculations, no appraisals. She saved the document. She went to bed. She was 34. Los Angeles, the particular golden light of a city that makes everything look warmer than it is. Carter Vanguard was 11 years old. Josephine was flying into LAX for a board meeting. Business class aisle seat, the navy pantsuit. She was reviewing documents on her laptop. She had her reading glasses on. She was not thinking about the flight. A flight attendant stopped at her row. Young blonde, perfectly courteous, the kind of courteous that is delivered from behind glass. She looked at Josephine's boarding pass, then at Josephine, then at the boarding pass again. "Are you in the right section?" she asked. Josephine looked up from her laptop. "Yes," she said. "Business class seat 14C. "Oh," the attendant said. "Of course. I just wanted to make sure." She smiled. She moved on. 3 minutes later, she came back. "I just wanted to double-check the seat number," she said. "There was some confusion earlier about this row." "There was no confusion," Josephine said. Evenly. "I am in seat 14C. This is seat 14C. My boarding pass confirms seat 14C. Is there something else you need from me?" The attendant said no and moved on and did not come back. Josephine looked out the window at the tarmac. She looked at the men 3 rows forward. 3 of them, business attire, none of them asked to verify anything. She turned back to her documents. She took off her reading glasses. She put them back on. By the time the plane landed, she had drafted the acquisition strategy she would one day use to buy an airline. She had not bought Meridian because of a flight attendant in Los Angeles. But she had not forgotten her either. In seat 38, Josephine opened her eyes. The engines were settled into their pre-pushback idle. The cabin had quieted into the specific hush of people waiting. On her phone screen, one notification. Message received. Marcus Webb understood. Executing now. She turned the phone face down. She folded her hands on top of it. She looked at the oval window and the tarmac rain and the lights. She thought about her mother standing in the lobby of the Hamilton House Hotel in her good coat, holding a printed reservation, waiting 25 minutes for a manager who should have taken 30 seconds. She thought, "I finally found the right lobby, Mom." She waited for the world to catch up. The Boeing 777 was enormous and alive, even at idle sitting at the gate with its pushback tug attached and its auxiliary power unit doing the work. The aircraft was full of sound. The low cycling hum of the environmental systems, the pressurization sighing through the overhead vents, the mechanical language of a machine that had been built to be in the air and was waiting with the patient enormous energy of something designed for a purpose to get back there. In the economy cabin, the pre-departure quieting had begun. The overhead bin doors were sealed. The seatbelt signs were on. The flight attendants were doing their cabin walk, checking tray tables and seat backs, speaking in the quiet, measured tones of people running through a procedure they have run 10,000 times. The chaos of boarding had compressed itself into something almost peaceful, the particular suspended moment before a flight when everyone has agreed collectively to sit still and wait for gravity to be defeated one more time. Josephine sat in 38E with her hands folded on her phone and let the sounds of the cabin organize themselves around her. 3 rows forward in the middle section of economy, Priya Menon had her phone propped against the seatback tray and was monitoring 2 things simultaneously: her video upload, which had reached 14,000 views and was climbing with a speed that made something light up in her journalist's instincts, and the aircraft outside the window, which had not yet begun to move, but whose ground crew was visible making the final preparations for pushback. She had uploaded 3 clips. The first, Brenda taking Josephine's phone. The second, the full confrontation at the podium, edited to 2 minutes. The third, a 30-second clip of Josephine walking through the first-class cabin with the caption, "This woman just got bumped from her confirmed seat to row 38. Watch how she walks through first class." The comments on the third clip were arriving faster than she could read them. She stopped trying to read them. She kept her phone on the tray table and watched the window. She did not know yet what she was watching for, but her instinct, sharpened by 6 years of documenting exactly these kinds of situations, said that this one was not finished. Up in the cockpit, Captain Tom Gallagher was running his pre-pushback checklist with the practiced efficiency of a man who had sat in this seat for 23 years and found deep, genuine satisfaction in doing his job correctly. He was 54 years old, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of calm that is not the absence of feeling but is instead a discipline, the learned stillness of someone who has understood for decades that the specific value of a person in his position is their ability to keep thinking clearly when everything is wrong. Beside him, First Officer Derek Salas was completing the secondary checklist. Salas was 41, 12 years with Meridian, the kind of quietly excellent officer who would have been a captain already if the airline's expansion had proceeded on its original timeline instead of stalling in the wake of the acquisition rumors. "Ground crew is clear," Salas said, noting the signal from outside. "Copy that." Gallagher reached for the parking brake release. "JFK ground Meridian 408 heavy, ready for push." The air traffic controller's voice came back clearance to push face south on taxiway Alpha. Gallagher acknowledged. He began the pushback sequence. The tug connected to the nose gear began its slow, massive effort of moving 350 tons of aircraft across a wet tarmac. Gallagher reached for the parking brake. The CARS terminal flashed. Not an emergency color, not the red of a fire warning or the amber of a system alert. A specific priority color, red-bordered, that Gallagher had seen exactly twice in his career, once during a severe weather emergency rerouting, and once during a security threat protocol that had turned out to be a false alarm. He pulled his hand back from the parking brake and reached for the acknowledge button. The message loaded. He read it. He read it again. He looked at it for a long moment with the expression of a man whose brain is running the same sentence through its processor several times because the sentence does not make sense, and then running it again because perhaps the problem is the processor, and then arriving unwillingly at the conclusion that the sentence makes complete and precise sense, and the problem is only that he does not like what it means. Tom Salas was watching his captain's face. "What is it?" Gallagher pointed at the screen. Salas leaned over and read. "Urgent dispatch override to Captain T. Gallagher, Meridian Flight 408. Aircraft operational lease revoked effective immediately by parent holding corporation Carter Vanguard Capital. Aircraft classified as private property under corporate embargo per Apollo Aviation Acquisition Clause 4B. Do not push back. Do not start engines. Flight 408 is canceled. Hold position and await instructions from corporate security. Authorization, CEO, desk, Carter Vanguard Capital." Salas sat back. A long silence. "Who is Carter Vanguard Capital?" As of 36 hours ago, Gallagher said, his voice level and grim according to those authentication codes. "Our owners." Salas looked at the codes at the bottom of the message. He recognized the format. Root server authentication, the kind of access embedded so deep in the airline's operational infrastructure that it could only be triggered by the absolute top of the corporate chain. This was not a hack. This was not a system glitch. This was someone who had the legal authority to stop this aircraft stopping it. Gallagher reached up and switched off the fuel pump activation. He disengaged the pushback sequence. He keyed the ground crew frequency. "Ground crew, this is the flight deck. Disconnect and hold position. We are not pushing back." "Copy 408. You have a mechanical?" The ground crew chief sounded confused. A mechanical was the only thing that made sense to him. "Negative," Gallagher said. "We have a corporate grounding order." A pause from outside. "Say again, 408. Corporate grounding order. Disconnect and hold." A longer pause. "Understood. Disconnecting." Gallagher sat back in his seat. He looked at the ACARS screen. He looked at the night rain on the windshield. He looked at the taxiway they were not going to use. He thought about the 342 people in the cabin behind him who had packed their bags and bought their tickets and made their plans, and were waiting right now in the particular hopeful suspension of the pre-departure moment to go to London. He reached for the PA handset. In seat 38, Josephine heard the intercom click. The sound of an aircraft intercom activating has a specific quality. A slight compression in the ambient noise, a fractional increase in attention throughout the cabin, the communal alerting of hundreds of people to the fact that someone with authority is about to speak. Josephine heard it. She did not open her eyes immediately. She let the click settle. She felt the smile arrive at the corners of her mouth. Small private, the smile of someone who has placed a call and is now hearing the phone ring on the other end. She opened her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Gallagher's voice was professional and controlled, which made the content of what he said land harder than if he had sounded distressed. "I apologize for the sudden update, but we have just received an emergency priority override from our corporate dispatch. Meridian Flight 408 has been officially grounded. We will not be flying to London tonight. Crew, please prepare for door opening." The cabin erupted. The sound was immediate and physical. Not a unified reaction, but 1,000 individual ones arriving at almost exactly the same moment, layering on top of each other into something that was less like noise and more like pressure. A man 3 rows ahead of Josephine was on his feet before the intercom had fully clicked off, shouting about a connection to Dubai. A woman in the middle section began crying. Not tears of frustration, but the sudden collapse of someone who has been holding a very specific hope for a very long time, and the trip to London she was on was something she had saved for and waited for, and now it was not happening tonight. A baby previously drowsing felt the change in the cabin's emotional temperature the way babies do, through the bodies of the adults around it, and began to cry with a clarity that cut through the surrounding noise. The teenager to Josephine's right ripped out his earbuds. His mouth was open. "What does that mean? Are we getting off?" The elderly man to her left woke with a start, grabbed the armrest, looked around with the wide, disoriented eyes of someone coming back from very far away. "What happened?" he said. "Are we landing?" "We never took off," Josephine said gently. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and she watched the cabin become what it was going to become. The rising voices, the frantic phones coming out, the flight attendants moving quickly through the aisles, with the careful, purposeful steps of people managing a situation they have not been trained for, because it has never happened before. She was the stillest thing in the cabin, possibly the stillest thing on the aircraft. 3 rows forward, Priya Menon had her phone raised and was filming the chaos while simultaneously watching the view counter on her third clip, 47,000 views. Rising. Her caption, refreshed. Flight 408 just got grounded. Mid-pushback. I am still on the plane. Something is happening. She turned and filmed the row behind her, capturing the wave of reaction rolling backward through the economy cabin, and then she turned further and found in the very last row one passenger who was not reacting. A woman in a cream cashmere sweater with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes quiet and something in her face that was the precise opposite of surprised. Priya lowered her phone slightly. Their eyes met. Josephine looked at the phone. She looked at Priya, the faintest nod. Not instruction, not performance, just acknowledgement. 2 women in the same cabin, one of whom had been watching from the beginning and one of whom had been watching longer than that. Priya raised her phone again. She framed it carefully. The chaos of 300 panicked passengers behind and in the foreground. One woman absolutely still in the middle seat of the last row who looked like the only person on the aircraft who knew exactly what was going to happen next. She uploaded it without a caption. The clip was 14 seconds. It had 90,000 views before the seatbelt sign turned off. Up in the first-class cabin, Richard Harmon had slammed his champagne glass down on the mahogany side table and was pressing the call button with the specific rhythmic aggression of someone who has confused urgency with effectiveness. Sophia Reyes arrived. He demanded the captain. He talked about lawsuits, about diamond status, about the $500 million merger that was now, as of this announcement, in genuine danger of collapsing. His voice carried into business class. A woman in 8A covered her ears. Sophia stood in front of him with her face arranged in the professional neutrality she had maintained for 12 years, and she said clearly, "And once, Mr. Harmon, this aircraft has been legally grounded by its corporate ownership. We are not permitted to fly. I need you to remain seated while we return to the gate." Richard opened his mouth. Sophia looked at him with the expression of someone who has already had this conversation in her head and knows exactly how it ends. "If you stand up again," she said quietly, "I will have you removed from the aircraft first. Please sit down." He sat down. The tug reattached to the nose gear and began the slow, heavy work of towing the Boeing 777 back toward Gate B-24. In the middle seat of row 38, Josephine Carter picked up her leather tote from under the seat and placed it in her lap. She was ready. She was in fact more ready than anyone else on this aircraft, which was appropriate because the next part was hers. The cockpit of the Boeing 777 was, under normal circumstances, one of Tom Gallagher's favorite places on Earth. He had spent 23 years accumulating the right to sit in the left seat of aircraft like this one, not by accident, not by inheritance, but by the specific patient labor of someone who had decided at 19 years old and his first solo flight in a Cessna 172 over rural Ohio that this was what he wanted to do with his life and who had organized every subsequent decision around that North Star. He had flown freight in the dark. He had flown commuter runs in weather that would make passengers weep if they could see the radar. He had earned his way to the left seat of a 777 through 23 years of doing his job with the kind of thoroughness that does not require witnesses to have value. Tonight, the cockpit was not his favorite place on Earth. Salas was on the company dispatch frequency trying to get more information. The dispatcher on the other end was audibly out of his depth. He confirmed the authentication codes were valid. He confirmed the grounding order was real. He confirmed that Carter Vanguard Capital was, as of a regulatory filing completed 36 hours ago, the parent holding company of Apollo Aviation Group, which made it the ultimate corporate owner of Meridian Airlines and every aircraft in its operational fleet, including the Boeing 777 they were currently sitting in. Beyond that, the dispatcher knew nothing. He was waiting for instructions from the legal team. He would pass on whatever he received. Salas ended the call and looked at Gallagher. I looked up. "Carter Vanguard," Salas said. He was holding his phone. "There is a wire service item from earlier this evening. Not published, but it is on the financial feeds. Carter Vanguard Capital acquires Apollo Aviation Group in hostile takeover. Regulatory confirmation expected at tomorrow's market open." Gallagher read the screen. He said nothing for a moment. The rain was still marking the windshield in diagonal lines. The floodlights outside turned the tarmac amber. The ground crew had disconnected and was waiting at a distance, uncertain. "So whoever is on this plane," Gallagher said, "owns the plane. And the airline," Salas said. "And us, technically." Another silence. Gallagher looked at the ACARS screen, still displaying the grounding order. He had not cleared it. He found that he did not want to clear it. That having the text visible felt important, as though looking away from it might cause him to lose the thread of what was actually happening. In the terminal, 2 gates away and moving quickly, Victor Okafor had his phone pressed to his ear and his jacket flapping open and his tie loosened, and the specific expression of a man who has been sitting in a comfortable position and has just been informed that the floor he was sitting on is not a floor. Victor was the VP of Hub Operations for JFK, which under normal circumstances was a senior and largely administrative role, managing gate assignments, coordinating ground crews, liaising between the airline's operational teams and the airport authority. He had held the role for 7 years. He had managed medical emergencies, weather delays, 2 ground stops, and 1 full terminal evacuation drill that had taken 2 years to recover from organizationally. He had never in 7 years received a call from the global CEO of Apollo Aviation Group telling him that the airline had been acquired and the new owner was currently on a grounded flight and needed to be. And then the global CEO had said several other things in a register that Victor had not previously heard from the man. Victor was running, his security badge slapped against his chest with each stride. He had, in the 90 seconds since hanging up the phone, assembled mentally the 3 most important facts he currently possessed. The acquisition was real. The CEO of the acquiring company was on Flight 408, and Flight 408 had just been grounded. He did not know why it had been grounded. He suspected with a deepening dread that he was about to find out in a way he would not enjoy. He called ahead to Gate B-24. The line rang 4 times. Brenda answered. In the cockpit, Gallagher was looking at the passenger manifest on his secondary display. He had pulled it up on instinct, the same instinct that makes a professional in a confusing situation reach for the information that is available rather than sitting in the absence of what is not. He scrolled through the names. Business class, economy. He ran his finger down the list to the seat assignments. Row 38. 38, a 38C, 38E. 38E Carter Josephine. He stared at it. He looked at the name. He looked at the ACARS screen with its grounding order signed CEO Desk, Carter Vanguard Capital. He looked back at 38E. Derek, he said. Salas looked over. Gallagher pointed at the manifest, then pointed at the ACARS screen. Let the math do itself. Salas read it. He sat back. He exhaled slowly. She is in the middle seat, he said. By the lavatories. Middle seat, Gallagher confirmed. By the lavatories. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The rain marked the windshield in diagonal lines. Outside, the tug crew waited at a distance, uncertain. How does something like this happen? Salas said. And it was not really a question. It was the sound a person makes when they understand the answer but want to say out loud once that they find it unacceptable. Gallagher reached for the PA handset. He had to tell the crew to prepare for door opening. He had to get them back to the gate. He had to manage the 342 passengers who were currently in various states of furious confusion in the cabin behind him. He looked at 38E one more time. Then he keyed the handset and did his job. 342 people is a lot of people to be angry at the same time in a sealed metal tube. The economy cabin went first, as it always does. The section where people have the least margin, where a canceled flight does not mean a rebooked first-class ticket and a lounge visit, but means a missed connection. That means a missed event. That means something real and irreplaceable that will not happen now. The man going to Dubai was on his feet within 30 seconds of the announcement, his voice carrying the specific pitch of someone who cannot afford to miss this particular flight and needs everyone around him to understand that. A mother in the middle section had her hands over her face. Her children, 9 and 6, were watching her with the wide-eyed alarm of children who measure the severity of a situation entirely by how their parent is responding to it. An elderly British couple, gray-haired and neatly dressed, held hands across the seat between them. They were going to London for their 50th anniversary. They did not say anything. They just held hands and looked at the seat backs in front of them. The overall noise was not a roar. It was 1,000 overlapping conversations and reactions and recalibrations happening simultaneously, and the cumulative effect was something physical. A change in the pressure of the air inside the cabin, the specific quality of shared stress that 300 people generate when they are all processing bad news at the same time in a very small space. The flight attendants moved through it with efficiency and composure, which is to say they did what trained professionals do when the situation is outside the normal parameters. They worked the edges of it, answering the questions they could answer, redirecting the ones they could not, keeping people seated, keeping people calm, doing what they could with what they had. Business class was quieter but more volatile in its particular way. The silence of people who have resources and are rapidly calculating how to deploy them. Laptops snapped shut. Phone calls were placed. A man in row 8 was talking to what sounded like a lawyer. A woman in row 10 was requesting through the app on her phone a rebooked ticket on a partner airline before the first flight attendant had made it to her row. First class Richard Harmon. He was standing in the aisle again. Sophia had told him to sit, and he had sat. And then he had gotten back up because the situation, as it was presenting itself, was not compatible with his understanding of how the world worked, and when Richard Harmon encountered situations incompatible with his understanding of how the world worked, he responded by refusing to accept the physical parameters of his immediate environment. "This is ridiculous," he was saying loudly to anyone who would listen, which was none of the flight attendants and none of the other first-class passengers who had moved from their initial shock into a collective quiet that suggested they were all separately hoping he would stop. "I have a $500 million signing in London tomorrow morning. You want to explain to me how a corporate grounding is more important than that? Who authorized this? I want a name." I want to talk to a human being who can tell me what is happening, Sophia said for the third time. Mr. Harmon, I need you to sit down. I do not need to sit down, I need to get to London. Sitting down, Sophia said with the specific, quiet firmness of someone who has decided they are done being pleasant about this is not optional. Sit down, or I will have you removed from the aircraft first before any other passenger. That is not a threat. That is the protocol for a disruptive passenger, and you are currently being a disruptive passenger. He sat down. In the middle of the economy cabin, Priya Menon was walking slowly toward the rear of the plane phone raised, capturing the layers of chaos as she went. She had one eye on the scene in front of her, and one eye on the view counter on her secondary screen, 94,000. The comments were coming in faster than any algorithm could organize them. People were tagging journalists. People were tagging Meridian Airlines official accounts. People were asking what flight, what gate, who was the woman in the cream sweater, did anyone know who she was. Priya reached row 38. Josephine Carter was the only seated passenger in the entire rear cabin who was not on her feet or actively talking. She sat in the middle seat with her leather tote in her lap, and her hands folded on top of it, and she was looking forward with an expression of complete stillness. Not distance, not disconnection. More like the specific quality of attention that looks like calm from the outside because it is too focused to perform any other emotion. Priya slowed her walk. She lowered her phone slightly. Something had been nagging at her since the gate. The quality of this woman's stillness, the way it had not changed from the priority lane to the confrontation with Brenda, to the walk through first class to the middle seat by the lavatories. The kind of stillness that belongs to someone who is not surprised, not by any of it. Their eyes met. Josephine looked at Priya's phone, then at Priya's face. Something passed between them. Recognition maybe, or a simpler thing, one person telling another that what they are witnessing is real and matters and deserves to be seen. Josephine gave the smallest nod. Priya raised her phone. She framed it carefully. Josephine in the foreground, the churning chaos of 300 displaced passengers stretching back behind her in every direction, and in the middle of all of it, this one woman in the middle seat of the last row, sitting as if she had all the time in the world. She uploaded the clip. 14 seconds, no caption. The view counter hit 100,000 before she had put her phone back in her pocket. The aircraft lurched. The tug had reattached. The slow, grinding process of moving 350 tons of metal back across a wet tarmac toward Gate B-24 had begun. In seat 38, Josephine felt the movement and picked up her tote and placed it properly on her lap. She was ready to stand. She was in every meaningful sense ready for what came next. The 342 people around her were not, but they were about to be part of it regardless. Brenda Kowalski was reaching for her handbag when the monitor emitted the 3-tone error. She had been in the process of a satisfying end to her shift. The specific satisfaction of someone who has managed a difficult evening and emerged from it with what she believed was a net positive. The Diamond member was happy the difficult passenger had been dealt with, and the plane had pushed back on time. She had straightened her terminal, logged her notes, and was looking forward to the train ride to Queens and the leftover pasta she had put in the refrigerator this morning. She had earned it. The 3-tone error cut through her satisfaction like a fire alarm through a dream. She looked at the screen. The entire flight manifest for Flight 408 had turned a solid, pulsing, critical red. She stared at it for a moment, waiting for it to resolve itself the way system glitches sometimes did, the color draining back to normal as the servers caught up with themselves. It did not resolve. It pulsed. She clicked her mouse. The terminal froze. A pop-up appeared, white text on black terminal access revoked. Contact hub manager immediately. She reached for the landline. It was already ringing. She picked up the receiver. Gate B-24, Brenda speaking. The voice on the other end was Victor Okafor's, and she had heard Victor's voice perhaps a dozen times in her 22 years, always through the official channels of operational briefings and ground crew logistics. She had never heard it like this. She had never heard it at this volume, at this register, moving at this speed. He sounded like a man who had been running and was still running even though he was on a phone. Brenda. The acquisition. Flight 408. I need you to tell me that Josephine Carter is comfortable in first class. Brenda's hand tightened on the receiver. The terminal around her had taken on a slight unreality the way it does when information arrives that your brain is not ready to process. She looked at her physical manifest, the printed copy on the clipboard beside her keyboard. She ran her finger down the passenger list. She found the name. Carter. Josephine. She had moved her to row 38. Mr. Okafor, she began. Brenda, confirm her status. The plane is towing back right now. I am 90 seconds from your gate with the legal team. Have her met at the door. She is not in first class, Brenda said, and then stopped and tried again. What did you say? Victor's voice had dropped from frantic to something much worse. Quiet. Precise. Brenda heard her own voice explain it. She heard herself say, Diamond member missed check-in, system error, overbooking. The words came out in the right order, and none of them were technically false, and all of them together were the most accurate description of a series of deliberate choices that she could manage. She heard herself say, row 38 middle seat lavatories. She heard the line go dead. 3 feet to her left, Elena Reyes was standing at the secondary terminal, and she had heard every word. Elena looked at Brenda. Brenda looked at the dead handset in her hand. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the look between them did not already contain. Elena had sent the compliance message an hour ago. She did not know what the compliance office had done with it. She did not know whether it had arrived in time, whether it had gone to the right person, whether it had any connection to the grounding order that had just sent Victor Okafor sprinting across 2 terminals. She knew only that she had taken the step, for the first time, after 8 months of not taking it. It was too late to change what had happened tonight. It was not too late for every night after. Victor arrived at gate B 24 in 58 seconds, not 90. He was breathing hard. His jacket was open. His tie was listing to the left, and behind him were 3 people in dark suits who moved with the quiet efficiency of people whose job is to be in rooms where things have gone wrong and make sure they do not get worse. Carter Vanguard, corporate security, dispatched from their Manhattan field office 14 minutes after Josephine had hit send. The economy passengers were beginning to flow off the jet bridge. The first ones emerging with the particular tight-jawed energy of people who have been sitting in a bad situation for 40 minutes and are now required to handle the logistics of a canceled international flight. They came through in a stream, and the gate area, which had been nearly empty when Brenda was reaching for her handbag, was filling rapidly. Richard Harmon came off first. Of course he did. He had bullied his way to the front of the boarding queue and then bullied his way to the front of the deplaning queue with the same aggressive forward momentum that governed his entire approach to physical space. He spotted Brenda before he had fully cleared the jet bridge door. You, he said, pointing, advancing. Get me on another flight, right now. London, any carrier. I do not care what it costs. And I want a hotel voucher and a corporate apology in writing because what just happened to me on that aircraft constitutes... One of the Carter Vanguard security personnel stepped into his path. Not aggressively, just into his path with a forearm the size of a structural beam, positioned with a simple and complete authority that stopped Richard mid-sentence. Step aside, sir, the security officer said without looking at him. Richard bounced off the forearm and stumbled slightly and stared. Did you just... Are you serious right now? Do you know who I am? The security officer had already looked away. He was watching the jet bridge door. Richard stood in the gate area with his garment bag and his wounded dignity and his Rolex and stared at the stream of economy passengers filing past him and the Carter Vanguard security team around them and Victor Okafor sweating through his suit by the podium. And he started to understand in the slow, unwilling way that people understand things that contradict everything they believe about themselves, that something had happened here tonight that was much larger than a seat assignment. He turned to look at Brenda. Brenda was not looking at him. She was looking at the jet bridge door. Her face had gone completely white, and her hands were gripping the edge of the podium, and she was watching the stream of passengers with the fixed, wide-eyed stillness of someone waiting for an inevitable thing to arrive. The stream of passengers thinned. The last few economy passengers came through, and then the jet bridge was empty for a moment, and then the crowd in the gate area parted. Shifted backward without being told the way crowds shift when something they recognize as significant is moving toward them. And Josephine Carter walked off the plane. She had let the cabin empty, while 341 other passengers pushed and gathered and filed toward the forward exit. Josephine had sat in the middle seat of row 38 with her tote in her lap and waited. She watched the rows clear forward. She watched the flight attendants manage the flow with the practiced precision of people handling organized chaos. She nodded once at Sophia Reyes, who was standing in the forward galley, and Sophia nodded back. A small, complete exchange between two women who did not need more words than that. When the cabin was nearly empty, Josephine stood. She adjusted her cashmere sweater. She picked up her tote. She walked forward. She passed row 38's neighbors, the teenager scrolling his phone in the gate area, by now the elderly man helped forward by a flight attendant. She walked through the economy cabin, now empty and rearranged, with the specific dishevelment of a space 300 people have recently left. Abandoned magazines, forgotten earbuds, a child's drawing wedged into a seat pocket. She walked through business class, through the forward galley, past the first-class cabin with its soft lighting still on, and Richard's champagne glass still on the mahogany side table, half full, the bubbles long gone flat. Suite 1A was empty. The ottoman still held the impression of stocking feet. She paused for exactly 1 second. Then she walked through the forward door and onto the jet bridge and up the incline toward the terminal. She heard the gate before she reached it. The accumulated noise of 342 displaced passengers, the particular pitch of a large crowd in a state of stressed confusion. She heard Victor's voice somewhere in it, managing, apologizing, organizing. She heard Richard's voice, still elevated, still demanding. She walked through the door into Terminal 4. The crowd in the gate area did something when she emerged. It did not do it because it knew who she was. Most of it did not yet. It did it because the specific quality of her movement through the space was different from every other person who had come through that door. The passengers who had deplaned were moving with the energy of disruption, looking for answers, looking for phones, looking for the exits and the rebooking desks. Josephine walked with the energy of someone who knows exactly where she is going and is going there at a pace that belongs to her. The crowd shifted, parted, not all at once, just by inches by the natural physics of people making room for something they sense without being told deserves room. Victor Okafor saw her first. He covered the distance between them in 5 large, rapid steps. "Ms. Carter," he said, and his voice had the specific quality of someone performing a tremendous amount of emotional control at once. "I cannot express the depth of my apologies. We had no indication you were traveling commercial tonight. The restructuring team did not inform the ground staff. This is a complete failure on our part, and I take full responsibility." Josephine raised one hand palm out quiet. Victor stopped. She looked at the gate area, the displaced passengers, the Carter Vanguard security detail, Elena Reyes standing off to the side of the podium, hands at her sides, Brenda Kowalski behind the counter gripping its edge, Priya Menon phone raised, and Richard Harmon, who had gone quiet for the first time in the last hour, staring at Josephine with an expression that was processing something too large for him to get his face around. "You," Richard said. He pointed at her. The pointing finger trembled slightly. "You are the woman from the priority line." Josephine turned her gaze to him. She looked at him the way she had looked at him from the aisle when he raised his champagne glass, fully clearly without the interference of any emotion that would blur the observation. "Mr. Harmon," she said. Her voice was level and resonant and carried easily across the gate area without needing to be raised. "You seem terribly confused. Allow me to clarify." The gate area went quiet. Not the whole terminal. 3,000 people moved through it. But the specific radius of gate B24 went to a hush that was almost physical, the way a hush can be physical when enough people produce it together. "My name is Josephine Carter," she said. "I am the founder and CEO of Carter Vanguard Capital." As of 36 hours ago, Carter Vanguard is the parent holding company of Apollo Aviation Group, which means I now own Meridian Airlines. She let that settle. One beat. I flew commercial tonight because I wanted to see how this airline treats passengers who do not look like they belong in first class. I did not have to wait long. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when a large number of people receive information that requires them to recalibrate everything they have just witnessed. Priya's view counter hit 300,000 in the time it took for the silence to settle. Josephine turned to Richard. "You missed your check-in window," she said. "You threatened a gate agent's employment to obtain a seat you had forfeited. You accepted a seat that was manually taken from another confirmed passenger, and you raised a glass of champagne at that passenger as she was forced to walk to the back of the aircraft." A pause. "Your global diamond status with Meridian Airlines is revoked effective this moment. You are permanently added to the no-fly list. Do not request a rebooking. Do not request a refund." Another pause, smaller. "You can walk to London." Richard's mouth opened. Then it closed. Then it opened again. He had been in rooms with powerful people his entire adult life, and he had always understood instinctively which way the power was running. Who had it, who wanted it, who was pretending. He understood it now. The color left his face in the specific way it leaves a face when a person realizes all at once and irreversibly that they have made the worst miscalculation of their life. Josephine turned to Brenda. Brenda was gripping the edge of the podium with both hands. Her face was the face of someone watching a consequence arrive that they knew was coming, and had hoped until this moment might somehow not. Josephine's voice did not rise. It did not carry contempt. Contempt requires heat, and what Josephine brought to this moment was not hot. It was cold and clear and precise, the temperature of a truth being stated plainly. "You saw a fully confirmed ticket and decided it was not real," she said. "You took my phone from my hand in front of witnesses. You lied about an overbooking that did not occur. You manually modified the reservation system to give my seat to a man who missed his own check-in window. And you placed me in the last row of the aircraft next to the lavatories and handed me a paper pass like a punishment." She held Brenda's gaze. "You did all of this in under 3 minutes, without hesitation, because you have been doing it or some version of it for a very long time, and because no one ever stopped you." A beat. "Tonight is the last time." She turned to Victor. "Rebook every passenger on this manifest onto partner airlines. Full cash refunds. Maximum compensation vouchers. Tonight. No one waits until morning." The passengers around the gate area who had been furious 90 seconds ago went very quiet. Some of them were looking at Josephine with expressions that had shifted, from frustration to something more complicated. The woman who had been crying stood with her hand over her mouth. Josephine looked toward the side of the podium where Elena Reyes was standing. Elena was very still. She was watching Josephine with an expression that was harder to name, something between relief and something that had been waiting a long time to be relieved. "You saw what happened tonight?" Josephine said to her. "You took a step forward and stopped. I understand why. But I want you to know, I saw the step." She reached into her tote and produced a business card. She held it out. Elena came forward and took it. Their fingers touched briefly. "Call my office Monday morning," Josephine said. She looked one more time at the gate area. All of it the displaced passengers and the pulsing monitors and the Carter Vanguard security detail and Priya's raised phone and Brenda's white-knuckled grip on the podium. "This airline will be different," she said, "starting tonight." She turned to her security detail. "Have my jet prepped at Teterboro. I have had enough of commercial aviation for one evening." She turned and walked away. Her heels clicked once, twice, 3 times on the terminal floor, and then the crowd shifted behind her, and she was gone. And in her wake, Gate B-24 was very quiet for a long moment, the quiet of a space in which something permanent has just happened, and everyone present knows it, but has not yet found the words. Richard Harmon sat down on a plastic chair near the window and stared at the tarmac. Brenda Kowalski let go of the podium and her hands were shaking. Elena Reyes looked at the business card in her hand. She turned it over once. Then she put it in her pocket and went back to work because there were 342 passengers who needed to get somewhere, and she knew how to help with that. Richard Harmon stood at the ticket counter of a rival carrier 40 minutes after leaving Gate B-24. His Centurion card on the counter and his passport in his hand, and the absolute conviction that the machinery of his life, which had always responded to the application of money and status, would respond now. The agent swiped the card, typed his passport number. The screen loaded. Then it flashed red. "I am sorry, Mr. Harmon," the agent said, sliding his passport back. "Our system is declining this purchase. You have been flagged under a Level 3 disturbance protocol by our alliance partners. We are unable to issue an international boarding pass for any flight departing the United States for the next 72 hours pending review." Richard stared at the screen. "That is impossible," he said. "I did not do anything." "I am sorry, sir." "Call your supervisor." "I have, sir. The flag is at the alliance level. There is nothing we can do from this counter." He tried 2 more carriers. Same result. Carter Vanguard possessed equity stakes across the aviation sector broad enough that a directive from its CEO quietly cross-pollinated through the global shared security databases used by the major airline alliances had made Richard Harmon's passport a document that would not get him on an international flight tonight or tomorrow or the day after. Or he sat in an airport hotel room in Queens at 4 a.m. with his jacket off and his Rolex on the nightstand and his phone face up on the bed, and when it began vibrating, he knew who it was before he looked, his managing partner. The call lasted 4 minutes. The consortium in London had been sitting in a boardroom for 45 minutes. They were not waiting. The deal, the $500 million merger that Richard had built 3 years of his career around closing, was over. His managing partner's voice, by the end of the 4 minutes, was not loud. Loud would have been better. What it was, instead, was the very quiet voice of a man who has made a decision and is simply communicating it. "Clean out your desk." The call ended. By the time the opening bell rang on the New York Stock Exchange, the internal memo had circulated. Richard Harmon terminated for gross negligence violation of corporate conduct standards and catastrophic failure of professional responsibility. His key card deactivated. His equity shares frozen pending legal review. His name in the tight and unforgiving world of high finance where everyone knows everyone and everything moves by reputation, beginning its quiet slide into the register of people whose calls do not get returned. He had spent his entire adult life assuming that the seat he was in was the seat he deserved. It had taken him one evening to prove that he had never actually earned it. 2 days later, the union office was fluorescent lit and smelled of old coffee and the particular staleness of a space where difficult conversations happen regularly. Brenda sat across from Tom Gallagher. Not the captain, a different Tom. Tom Gallagher, the union representative, 20 years in the job, who had seen everything and had the specific weathered patience of someone who has spent 2 decades fighting management on behalf of workers, who were sometimes right and sometimes not. Brenda had been talking for 40 minutes. She had constructed her narrative carefully in the way people construct narratives when they know the story is going to be told and want to get to it first. Dedicated gate agent, 22 years, followed protocol, Diamond member with a legitimate priority claim. The other passenger was difficult and disruptive. A misunderstanding that corporate had weaponized. Tom had been writing notes. He had not interrupted. Then the envelope arrived. A courier in a dark suit. He handed it directly to Tom. Tom opened it. Inside was a single slim device. Encrypted sleek. He pressed the power button. A message from Carter Vanguard's legal division granted him one-time monitored access to a file. He pressed play. Gate B-24. High-definition security footage. The kind of clarity that makes you forget you are watching a recording and not standing in the room. The directional audio from the podium microphone. Brenda's voice captured with precision every word, every inflection, every drop in register when she turned to Richard Harmon and said quietly, almost warmly, "Don't worry. Some people just do not understand where they belong." The footage of the phone being taken from Josephine's hand. The 11 seconds at the keyboard. The paper pass sliding across the counter, all of it in sequence, clear and complete and entirely without ambiguity. Tom closed the device. He set it on the table between them. He did not say anything for a long moment. "I cannot help you," he said finally. "You did not make a mistake. I was ready to argue that you made a mistake because people make mistakes and mistakes can be defended, but you made a series of choices. I watched you make them." He slid his notepad away. "The union is not going to litigate deliberate discrimination. That is not what we are here for." The FAA regulatory review came 3 weeks later. Manifest manipulation, fraudulent equipment change documentation, violation of passenger rights statutes. Brenda's aviation security clearance was revoked. 22 years at Meridian Airlines, the gate podium that had been her kingdom, the burgundy velvet stanchion and the boarding scanner and the 22 years of unchecked authority, all of it over. She sat in her car in the Union parking lot afterward and looked at the steering wheel for a long time. She was not a monster. She was not a cartoon villain. She was a person who had been rewarded for a very long time for not asking herself certain questions. The problem with not asking questions is that reality does not wait for you to be ready for the answers. Elena Reyes called the number on the business card at 9:15 on Monday morning, 2 minutes after Josephine's office opened. The call was answered on the first ring. 3 weeks later, Elena was appointed Director of Frontline Experience for Meridian Airlines, a newly created role reporting directly to the integration leadership team overseeing Meridian's transition under Carter Vanguard. Her job to rebuild the culture of every Meridian ground operation, from the way passengers were greeted in priority lanes to the way complaints were received and documented and followed up on. Victor Okafor kept his job barely. His regional management structure did not. 6 managers across 4 cities were terminated following an audit of complaint records that had been buried, rerouted, or simply never opened. The 47 complaints filed in the 8 months before the acquisition were reopened. All 47. 43 resulted in findings. 31 resulted in action. Priya Menon's footage reached 4.7 million views. The Wall Street Journal ran the story on the front page of the business section. Not a puff piece, not a PR moment, but a genuine examination of what had happened at Gate B24 and what it revealed about the gap between an airline's stated values and its actual daily practice. The piece ended with a quote from an unnamed passenger who had been in the economy queue that night. She did not yell. She did not demand to speak to the manager. She just stood there and waited for them to show you exactly who they were. And then she showed you exactly who she was. 1 week later, a private jet somewhere over the North Atlantic. The cabin of Josephine's Gulfstream was quiet in the way that only very expensive things are quiet. An engineered silence, every vibration absorbed, the noise of the world kept at a careful distance. She had a cup of coffee. She had no phone in her hand. Through the oval window, the sky outside was the pale particular gray of early morning over the Atlantic, the kind of light that belongs to the hour before the world fully wakes up and fills itself with noise. She was not thinking about Richard Harmon. She was not thinking about the Wall Street Journal piece or the view counts, or the 47 complaints now being worked through by a team that had been specifically assembled to work through them properly. She was thinking about her mother, Ruth Carter, who had worked double shifts at a hospital for 31 years so that her daughter could go to college, had been gone for 4 years. She had not lived to see Carter Vanguard become what it became. She had not lived to read the journal piece or know what her daughter had done with the night she spent in seat 38E. She had not lived to see any of the things that Josephine had spent 25 years building toward. But she had lived to see the first dollar Carter Vanguard cleared. She had lived to see the Brooklyn office with its smell of old paint become real glass offices with her daughter's name on the door. She had lived to see enough. Josephine looked out the oval window at the pale dawn over the water. She thought about the Hamilton House Hotel in Baltimore, about her mother standing in the lobby in her good coat holding a printed reservation, waiting 25 minutes for a manager who should have taken 30 seconds. About her mother's face during those 25 minutes. Not broken, not angry, just enduring. about the decision she had made at 16, watching that face that endurance is not the same as acceptance. She spoke quietly to no one, to the pale gray light over the water. I finally fixed the lobby, Mom. The coffee was warm. The sky was getting lighter. Below, the Atlantic was dark and enormous and indifferent to everything, which is the Atlantic's great gift. The reminder that the things we make matter only because we decide they do, and we can decide that freshly every morning, every time we choose. 3 months later, Meridian Airlines, JFK Terminal 4. Elena Reyes sat at her desk in the glass-walled office that had replaced in her professional life the gate podium she had stood behind for 8 months. The office was small, but the glass made it feel open. She could see the terminal from here, the flow of passengers, the gate agents at their podiums, the rhythm of the operation she was now responsible for shaping. She was reviewing the training curriculum she had built from scratch over the past 6 weeks. It was thorough, and it was specific, and it was written in plain language without jargon, because the people who needed to use it were not policy specialists. They were people who worked gates and counters and boarding bridges, and who needed to understand in clear and human terms what it looked like to treat every person who walked through a terminal door as a person. She paused on the first slide. The one she had written last, the foundational one, the sentence she had gone back to again and again, because she needed it to be right. The first person through the door gets the same greeting as the last. No exceptions, no calculations, no appraisals. She thought about this moment she had taken a half step forward at gate B24 and stopped. She thought about standing with her fists tight at her sides and saying nothing for 8 months, because the cost of speaking up had always seemed higher than the cost of silence. She thought about Josephine Carter saying in the middle of gate B24 with 300 people watching, "I saw the step." She thought about what it means to take the step. Not the second step, not the big dramatic step, the first one. The one that costs something. The one that says, "I see what is happening here and I am not going to look away." She had taken it finally. Late, but not too late. She moved to the next slide. That same morning, gate B24 Terminal 4. The priority lane was roped off in burgundy velvet, as it had always been. The monitor above the gate displayed the departure information for the early London flight. Passengers were gathering in the boarding area. Economy passengers in the main queue, a handful of first-class travelers moving toward the priority stanchion. The gate agent on duty was a young man named Carlos, 23 years old, Hispanic, 8 weeks into his first airline job. He had been briefed on the new protocols. He had completed the new training. He had read the plain language document that a woman named Elena Reyes had written, the one that said the first person through the door gets the same greeting as the last. He was at 23, still figuring out how to be in the world. He made mistakes. He got nervous. Sometimes he moved too fast through the check-in process and forgot to make eye contact. He was learning. A woman approached the priority stanchion. She was in her early 40s, dark skin, natural hair, small carry-on. She was dressed simply. A light jacket, dark jeans, sneakers. Nothing that announced what she was or was not. Carlos looked up from his terminal. He smiled, a real one, the kind that starts in the eyes. "Good morning," he said. "Can I take your bag?" The woman blinked. A small, involuntary blink. The reaction of someone receiving something they had not expected, something so ordinary that its absence had become ordinary and its presence was now briefly startling. "Thank you," she said. She handed him her carry-on. He took it, tagged it, scanned her boarding pass. Everything was in order. Everything was as it should be. He handed back her documents and wished her a good flight and turned to the next passenger. She walked down the jet bridge. Nothing happened. There was no camera. There was no viral moment. There was no one watching with their phone raised. There was just a woman who bought a first-class ticket walking onto a plane, greeted the way every person who walks through that door is supposed to be greeted. That is what justice looks like when it is actually working. Not the moment the bully is held accountable. Though that matters. Not the viral video, or the corporate announcement, or the front-page story. Though those matter too. The thing that matters most is quieter than all of it the morning after and the morning after that, when someone walks through a door and is simply welcomed. When the greeting is not a surprise. When a woman hands over her carry-on without blinking because, of course, someone offered, because that is how this is supposed to work, because that has always been how this is supposed to work. If this story moved you, if you believe that the first person through the door deserves the same welcome as the last, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it right now. Every share means this story reaches someone who might need it today. And if you are not subscribed, yet hit that subscribe button. We tell stories like this every week, stories about dignity, justice, and the quiet power of people who refuse to be made small. Leave us a like if Josephine's story stayed with you and drop a comment below. Have you ever been made to feel like you did not belong somewhere you absolutely did? Tell us. We read every single one, and your story matters too. See you in the next story.